So this video lecture is going to cover two things, 2 weeks: global stratification and environmental issues. I realize we've already dealt with stratification in an earlier module, but I wanted to revisit it now because I think the issue of global stratification pertains more closely to these environmental issues that I really want to spend more time on. In particular, with global stratification, I want to again revisit some of those theoretical orientations from earlier in the class, most specifically, and you can see here on this slide, functionalism versus conflict theory, the ideas associated with each as explanations for understanding the globalization of the world and our society. I mentioned in an earlier video that one of my areas of scholarship and of interest is environmental sociology, and I teach a class regularly called Environmental Sociology, where we go into much more intensive discussion of these somewhat, I would say, critical environmental issues, up to and including climate change, which is the big one, the big problem that the world faces that I want you to spend some time thinking about when you engage the materials here. You'll see in these slides that I've provided you some hyperlinks to things like the actual population clock on the planet and in the United States. So you can see in live time, if you click here, how many people are in the United States versus how many people are on the planet. Wondering if you know what that number is. If you don't, go check it out. Because I then go on to talk about population pressures as being largely responsible for these other environmental problems that we want to talk about in this class, including climate change, resource extraction, and the depletion of resources on the planet, all I think related to population pressures and the growing population boom on this planet. And then the final thing I want you to learn about and think about in this class related to environmental issues is this thing called deep ecology. You can see on these slides I describe it in some detail, and there's another optional slide that goes into the more specific breakdown of what deep ecology is, if you want to review that. Here on this slide, I'm simply talking about it as a paradigm shift, deep ecology's relationship to, or converse relationship to human exemptionalism, which is the predominant guiding paradigm that we live in this consumer society. Deep ecology is another way to think about your relationship to the planet, and so I wanted to expose you to this really this movement in which a lot of people are thinking about new ways to think about human impact on the environment and our personal relationship with the planet. Deep ecology relates directly to some of this other content, including environmental justice and what it's about, and these so-called radical environmental groups like the Sea Shepherds, Earth First, and the like, where what I want you to think about here is the relationship between what these groups are doing to raise our consciousness about human impacts on the environment and why they're considered to be radical. I suggest that these so-called radical environmental groups are radical in ideology, not so much in what they do. I mean, they do protest and they chain themselves to trees and to bulldozers that are engaged in deforesting the land. But again, it's not these actions that I think make them radical. It's the ideas associated with why they do it. It's the idea spoken about in deep ecology that we are inextricably intertwined in the environment. We are part of the web of life. We need to understand our role and our impact on biodiversity on the planet in our human endeavors, specifically our extraction of natural resources in our commodity culture, our consumer culture, where we demand so much in terms of resources and supplies and energy on the planet, and the greater impact, and how we need to think about treading more lightly as everything we do affects everything else on the planet, other species, other plants, and so forth. I spent some time researching these radical environmental groups, which is why you're getting a little heavier dose of it in this class. I studied groups like Earth First when I was living in Portland, Oregon, which is kind of the home of these kinds of organizations, the spiritual home, if you will, but also environmental groups abroad. These groups that are working to raise our consciousness about our impacts and suggesting that we need to live a different way than previous generations. So I hope you appreciate that content as I wrap up this course. I think it's a subject that's going to gain more traction as we see our limits in terms of natural resources on the planet, and the need to start thinking about doing things differently in terms of our energy use and our consumer lifestyles in particular. So this is our last video lecture. So I just wanted to take the final minute of this video lecture to remind you that now would be a good time to send in your student evaluation and give me any comments you have about this class, including these video lectures if you find them useful or not, as a complement to the PowerPoint slides and other material, and anything else you think about this class that you want to tell me. I read everything that students send me in terms of feedback on the course. It's how I evolve the course and make it better for future students, future classes. So please take time to do your student evaluation. And as you get into the final photo essay, which I'll say a few things about maybe in another video, feel free to email me or ask me questions about the wrap-up material in this course as we wind down. I'll see you down the road.